There was a time when America felt like a promise. Your grandparents might tell you how they bought their first house at 25, raised a family on a single income, and maybe even retired with a decent pension. But today, many young Americans, especially Gen Z, are asking, was that promise ever real? Or did it vanish before they even got their shot? They grew up watching political fights on TV, climate warnings on their phones, and viral videos showing people their age protesting for basic rights. They're sharp with technology, skeptical, and tired of being told to just work harder when they're already juggling multiple jobs and side gigs just to pay rent. If you really want to know why Gen Z is feeling more frustrated than hopeful, you have to look at the reality they face every day. Student loans, rent hikes, broken politics, climate fear, and a mental health crisis that keeps growing. So, how did the wealthiest nation in the world lose the trust of its youngest generation? And what does Gen Z plan to do about it? Let's break it down step by step. Who is Gen Z, and why do they feel so different? First, who are we talking about? Gen Z means people born from about 1997 to 2012. In 2025, they're between 13 and 28 years old. The oldest are out of college, working full-time or trying to. The youngest are still in high school, watching the world their older siblings struggle to navigate. Gen Z is also the most diverse generation in US history.
Job market right now is...
I'm Caitlin, I'm a university graduate, and I applied to 647 roles before I got one.
Nobody will even give me an interview.
Basically, I'm not able to get a job.
I really don't understand how people are finding full-time jobs.
According to Pew Research, about 48% of Gen Z is non-white more than any generation before them. They grew up with smartphones, social media, 24/7 news, and a front-row seat to the world's biggest crises. They watched their parents lose jobs and homes during the 2008 recession. They survived school shootings and lockdown drills. They saw the COVID-19 pandemic cut off their senior proms, college dorms, and first jobs. They hear constant climate warnings, fires in California, floods in Vermont, heat waves in Texas. According to the Carnegie Endowment's 2025 report on Gen Z and foreign policy, this generation is deeply skeptical that American leaders are doing enough, whether on student debt, the cost of living, or the climate crisis. They also don't trust that the world's wealthiest country is really working for everyone, and they have good reasons for that. The college debt trap. Older generations told them, go to college, get your degree, the world will open up for you. But college is more expensive than ever. According to Federal Reserve data, total US student loan debt is now over $1.7 trillion, and Gen Z is carrying a big piece of that. In the USA Today piece from July 4th, young voters said student debt feels like a punishment for trying to do the right thing. Imagine graduating with $40,000 or $60,000 in debt, only to land an entry-level job that barely covers rent. Millions of Gen Z workers are doing just that. Biden's plan to cancel some student debt was struck down by the Supreme Court. A new plan is in the works, but many Gen Z voters say it feels like too little, too late. So, when older generations say stop whining, Gen Z looks at the numbers and says, this is not the same world you had. The housing dream that became a joke for decades, owning a home was the heart of the American dream. It was how people built wealth and stability. But for Gen Z, home ownership is slipping out of reach. According to Zillow, the typical US home price in 2025 is over $400,000, about 40% higher than it was just 5 years ago. Rent isn't any better. A report from a group that tracks affordable housing in the US shows that in 2025, the average renter needs to earn at least $29 per hour to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment, far above the minimum wage in most states. Gen Z is often told, stop spending on avocado toast and coffee. But even if they gave up every latte, that wouldn't cover the gap. The numbers just don't add up. So they move back in with parents, live with roommates, or spend half their paycheck just to keep a roof over their heads. Wages that can't keep up. Meanwhile, wages have barely budged. Adjusted for inflation, real wages for young workers have stayed flat since the early 2000s. A 2025 article from the Up and Up newsletter says that many young Americans feel stuck working part-time jobs, driving for apps, or taking on side gigs just to cover their bills. This is not just whining, it's survival. Gen Z is asking, how did America become a place where you can work full-time and still not afford to live? Climate anxiety, a heavy weight. Then there's the climate crisis, something Gen Z cares about deeply. In polls, climate change consistently ranks as a top concern for young people. The Carnegie Endowment survey found that over 60% of Gen Z want stronger climate action, even if it means major policy shifts. But they feel older leaders aren't moving fast enough. When they see oil drilling expand or climate deals get watered down to please corporations, they feel betrayed. To Gen Z, the climate fight is personal. They know they'll be alive in 2050, 2080 long after many of today's politicians are gone. They're asking, if you won't act now, what future are you leaving us? Mental health, the silent struggle. If you add all of this up with money stress, climate fear, broken promises, it's no wonder Gen Z is facing a mental health crisis. According to the CDC, nearly half of Gen Z adults report feeling persistently sad or hopeless. In the USA Today piece, young Democrats and independents said they feel a deep sense of political burnout. Social media makes it worse. They scroll through images of people living perfect lives while silently wondering why they feel so far behind. Therapy can help, but it costs a lot. Some people can't afford it, and others have to wait months just to get an appointment. A generation disillusioned with politics. For decades, Americans were told, if you want change, vote for it, and Gen Z did. They turned out in record numbers for Biden in 2020, pushing him over the finish line in swing states. Young voters made up almost 1 out of every 5 people who voted that year. Why? Because they wanted big change, climate action, gun reform, student debt relief. But what did they get? A pandemic that kept dragging on, a Supreme Court that blocked debt forgiveness, gun violence that kept making headlines, climate policies watered down to get the votes of older politicians more worried about gas prices than global warming. In the Carnegie Endowment 2025 survey, only about 28% of Gen Z says they strongly trust the US government to do what's right. That's lower than any older generation. In the New York Times College Grads Focus Group, one student summed it up. I feel like I did everything right. I studied hard, voted, followed the rules, and I'm still barely making it. What Gen Z actually wants, it's not rocket science. So, what does Gen Z really want? They're not asking for free houses, free money, or an easy life. They're asking for a system that works as promised, a fair shot. Let's break it down. Affordable housing. They want a future where working full-time means you can afford a safe place to live, not spend half your paycheck on rent, or fight big investment companies just to buy a first home. Fair wages. They want wages that rise with costs, not a minimum wage that hasn't budged in over a decade in many states. Debt relief. They want real solutions for the student debt crisis, not just political headlines and court fights. Climate action. They want leaders to treat the climate crisis like an emergency. It is not something to trade away for votes or oil deals. Mental health care. They want mental health support that's affordable and accessible, not months-long waitlists or therapists they can't afford. Safety. They want to go to school, concerts, and grocery stores without worrying if a gunman will show up. A voice. They want to be heard not just as voters, but as people shaping the future. These are not radical demands. They're basics, and when older generations mock them for it, the frustration only grows. What Gen Z is doing. Anyway, despite the broken promises, Gen Z isn't just sitting around. They're finding workarounds and building their own ways to survive. Co-living. Many are choosing roommates well into their 30s. Shared houses, co-living spaces, even multifamily setups to split costs. Remote work. Many have embraced remote or hybrid work, not because it's trendy, but because it saves time and rent money. Living with family or moving to cheaper cities is one of the only ways to get ahead. Side hustles. They're creating income streams on platforms like Etsy, Substack, Patreon, TikTok shops, anything that gives them a little extra freedom from unstable jobs. Mutual aid. They're building community support crowdfunding medical bills, sharing rides to protests, buying groceries for strangers. These aren't government programs, they're people stepping in where systems fall short. The disconnect older generations. Sometimes older generations say, "We struggled too, stop complaining." But here's the difference. Gen Z's rent-to-income ratio is worse than at any time since World War II. Healthcare costs more than ever. Wages haven't kept up for decades. College costs have grown by more than 160% since the 1980s. The climate crisis is not abstract, it's now. Fires, floods, hurricanes, they're paying the price already. So when Gen Z hears people say, just work harder, they stop listening. They're not lazy, they're realistic, they see the math doesn't work. Gen Z's unique way of fighting back. Here's what's different about this generation. They don't just complain, they organize, but they don't do it the old way. They use TikTok, Instagram, Reddit. A single clip can rally millions. They expose bad bosses, call out shady landlords, and fact-check politicians in real time. Remember in 2020 when Trump's rally in Tulsa had tons of empty seats? That happened because Gen Z TikTok users signed up with fake RSVPs and organized it through group chats with no unions or big money, just teamwork. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, it was Gen Z who used social media to share info on safe states, how to protest, and where to donate. They don't trust big institutions, they trust each other. Companies are starting to notice. It's not just politicians who need to adapt, companies do too. More Gen Z workers say they won't tolerate bad bosses, burnout, or unsafe work conditions. They're pushing for remote flexibility, better mental health benefits, student loan repayment help, more transparent pay. Some companies are trying, some are not, and when they don't, young people leave or expose toxic workplaces on TikTok costing brands millions in reputation damage. Real stories, real frustration. If you want to see this in action, just read the NYT College Grads Focus Group. One young grad said she's working 2 jobs, living at home, and still can't afford to move out. Another said his political science degree doesn't seem to help. Every beginner wants 3 years of experience, but no one will give him a chance to get it. A third said she spends nights helping her parents pay medical bills because her own job doesn't offer good health insurance. The good news and the big. If there is hope. Gen Z is resourceful. They know how to organize fast. They care about fairness, equality, climate, and community. They're more likely to vote, donate, and protest than older generations were at their age. But there's a big if. If leaders don't listen, this generation might stop showing up. If companies don't adapt, they'll lose the next wave of talent. If the system keeps failing, Gen Z will build their own, and it might not include the old ways. Final thoughts. A message for everyone. So here's the big takeaway. America's youngest generation doesn't hate this country. They love the idea of it, but they want the reality to match the idea. They don't want an American dream that only worked for their grandparents. They want one that works for them too. If they don't get it, they'll make noise. They'll vote, they'll organize, they'll boycott, they'll build something new. The only question is, will America listen? Your voice, and what happens next. So, what do you think? Are you Gen Z? Does this story feel like your life? Or are you older and finally see why your kids or students feel so frustrated? What would you change first if you could fix one thing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we read every single one. Hit that like button if this opened your eyes. Subscribe for more honest, fact-checked, easy-to-understand breakdowns, the stuff big news outlets often skip. We're not just talking about history, we're making it together.